I think he's someone that incites violence.
Do you?
I do. I don't think he should be broadcasting.
He would deny that.
He has caused so much hatred towards me. It's just not true.
If James O'Brien was not protected by virtue of the fact he sits squarely as the defender of the indefensible on the establishment left, he probably would have been cancelled, silenced, and arrested long ago. Because this toxic, highly unpleasant red-cheeked sociopath spreads more hate based on provable mistruths than anyone operating in the public square today. His hate campaign against Nigel Farage is not only deranged, it's becoming dangerous. O'Brien is trying to turn Farage into a target like Donald Trump in the US, and disturbingly, it's working. Nigel is not one to moan about criticism. He knows what's expected as part of the job. So the fact he said this about O'Brien on GB News is highly significant.
I thought that sentence there was interesting. For me, you're reaching out into your critics. I mean, how would you convince your old LBC chum, James O'Brien?
Well,
I mean, he says you stoke division, you know, all this.
I think he's someone that incites violence.
Do you?
I do. I don't think he should be broadcasting.
He would deny that.
He has caused so much hatred towards me. It's just not true. And, you know, I might have been criticised in the past, you know, for attacking people in the European Parliament. All I ever did was tease them. You know, some of these people, some of what's being said in media and being repeated out there in the streets, particularly since the riots, is really unpleasant.
Well, O'Brien might deny that, but Nigel is correct. In a very honest interview with Nick Ferrari last week on LBC, as James O'Brien lay in wait to whip up more hate, Nigel spoke in more detail than ever before about why he cannot even hold in-person surgeries in Clacton.
You won't be doing physical surgeries in Clacton?
Not yet.
Do you envisage that you will eventually?
When Parliament allows me.
Why is Parliament blocking you?
Have a guess.
Have you been advised for your own security not to hold surgeries?
I would have thought that would make sense, wouldn't you?
Who was that advice come from?
Well, you know, the Speaker's office.
Lindsay Hoyle's office.
And beneath the Speaker's office, there is a security team who give advice and say you should do some things and not do others. So we're not in a fit state to do the old-style surgeries. But you know what, David? If you've got something to say to me as a Clacton resident, actually Zoom is not the end of the world.
You won't be doing physical...
He made clear there is one person to blame in the MSM for that perilous situation.
Well, do you want to apologise for anything you said now?
No, I wish I'd...
the Farage riots by some people.
No, that was that moron.
They are called by some
that was that moron, O'Brien, that comes on this channel after you, and no wonder my security detail's as big as it is. It's because of people like him.
I have to ask you to expand on that.
Well, when you spread hatred and you spread lies, you anger a lot of people, and then their feelings against you become potentially violent.
How big is your security detail?
It's big, and it's changed a lot since quotes like that.
Well,
now that was a moment for O'Brien to reflect and make peace with Nigel. They were in the same studio, remember? Imagine if he had said, I disagree with every single one of your policy positions, but you are a former colleague, and I stress now on the record that I am not calling for any violence against you. We live in a democracy, and you should feel safe to campaign within the bounds of safety and the law. That would have been a unifying moment, showing that politics are one thing, but personal security comes above everything else in a civil society. Instead, O'Brien showed his true soul and doubled down.
Much.
Nigel Farage, thank you for appearing here on LBC and taking calls. I am done for another day. James O'Brien's the other side of the news on LBC. I'm with you tomorrow morning from 7. Meantime, stay safe.
Thank you, Nick. The time is approaching 10 o'clock and, well, there's a lot to get through today. For example, have you ever had violent race riots named after you, or indeed been accused by the head of the Met of emboldening the racist thugs responsible? Has your vile and ignorant rhetoric ever helped instigate attempts to burn people alive in their beds? Have you ever cited a self-described misogynist facing rape and people trafficking charges in Romania as a trustworthy news source for events in the UK? Or described yourself as part of a similar phenomenon to him? Have you ever helped a convicted woman beater get elected to the UK Parliament? And have any newly elected MPs spent more time in America getting binned off by Donald Trump than they have in their own constituency? And what would you call someone who answers yes to all those questions?
On your radio.
Disgusting. O'Brien appears to believe that Farage deserves to be attacked. No wonder Nigel feels he is inciting violence against him. Now, I know exactly what it's like when O'Brien unleashes his leftist mob of hate merchants based on complete mistruths. And so too do the victims of Carl Beach, the paedophile fantasist who O'Brien spent years publicly supporting in a bid to bring down his political enemies. And the Farage derangement syndrome, started by O'Brien on LBC, is fast spreading through the rest of the MSM, with Channel 4 at the Reform UK conference picking up the line that Nigel had something to do with causing these so-called riots in the wake of the Southport massacre.
Do you regret listening to Andrew Tate?
Millions of young men did. I didn't.
Well, you told LBC you did, that was where
No, I didn't.
Your tweet had come from.
I don't know what's wrong with you people. I said for a lot of young men he'd become a significant figure, which is something that should worry you and worry everybody.
But it didn't worry you enough to not repeat a rumour from him?
I didn't repeat any rumours from him.
Okay.
I asked for the truth, as did, and you might have forgotten this, as did the terrorism czar, as did Lord Carlisle. They said government must level with the people.
To stop rumours like the one that you spreading, some might say.
I left it for 48 hours before I commented, and I could see what was happening. There was lunacy happening online. And if we'd been told the truth, those riots would have been a fraction of the size.
Do you regret that tweet?
No.
You don't regret it?
It's not just O'Brien, by the way, who makes up the lunacy at LBC, which I now quite rightly call the Labour Broadcasting Company. Also leading the charge is the hard leftist Lewis Goodall, a client journalist for Labour at best, propagandist at worst. So here he was yesterday interviewing the Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson about the fact she accepted thousands of pounds from Labour donor Lord Ali to throw a birthday party.
He's given £300,000 to 7 cabinet ministers at the moment. Do you accept that there could be a perception, at the very least again, that one man giving so much money to so few people at the very top of government could be a little bit of a problem?
So Lord Ali, who I've only ever met in my time as a Labour MP, is someone that came from a pretty humble background, made his way very successfully in business, and as a Labour peer has donated to Labour politicians, to the Labour Party, in order to secure a Labour government. That's what he...
And paying for your birthday party?
He did donate. He donated to me to fund a number of events, yes, absolutely, declared in the correct way.
Was that essential to secure a Labour government, that birthday party?
It was a great opportunity, around that to have an event for colleagues in Westminster, including journalists, MPs, shadow cabinet as was, people in the education world. And I also hosted another event alongside that for journalists, including those who work in education, where I was joined by my colleagues from the shadow education team.
Would you accept more money from Lord Ali for other birthday parties?
I don't, to be honest with you, I don't usually make a big thing about my birthday, and that was a professional kind of context to it. My own birthday, in terms of celebrations with family, is usually a pretty low-key affair, and my own family didn't even come along to that event.
Oh, your own family may not have been there, Bridget Phillipson, but I'm going to show you how corrupted our mainstream media is. Because guess who was at that funded birthday party? Lewis Goodall, the bloke conducting that interview. And I have to say, that is seriously effed up. The Sun's political editor, Harry Cole, posted on X, the newsagent T-boy Lewis Goodall wasn't entirely honest with his listeners today. And he then linked to his column where he wrote, fearless interrogator Lewis Goodall beat up on Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson on his LBC show yesterday over taking donations from Lord Ali to pay for her 40th birthday party. What the lefty presenter failed to tell his listeners, however, was not only did he attend the glittery bash last year, he also asked for his wife to be invited to. Now, Lewis claimed that he had mentioned this obvious conflict earlier in the show, but it's really not the point. While LBC's main presenters are quite literally putting a target on Nigel Farage's back, they're giving a complete pass to the type of cronyism and sleaze that they just spent the past 5 years railing against. No wonder millions of you refuse to trust the corrupted and captured MSM. Now, let me bring in today's superstar panel. And today, I am delighted to welcome back the former UKIP leader Henry Bolton, author of the excellent Bolton's blog on Substack, which I really recommend everyone subscribe to, like I have, and making her Outspoken debut. A rising star that I've been very impressed with, the political commentator Chloe Dodds. She is a contributor for Reasoned UK, which I very much recommend you follow on YouTube. Great to have you both here. So, Henry Bolton, is Nigel Farage correct to say that James O'Brien is now inciting hatred against him?
I think so, absolutely. James O'Brien has been provocative, aggressive, unpleasant, nasty, and often untruthful commentator and presenter. He seems to want to build his career on what I might call shock tactics, coming out with absolutely appalling accusations of the most extreme nature, because he thinks it generates interest and it provokes listeners to get emotionally involved, and he's probably right, but it's downright irresponsible. And I do think that after his latest attack on Nigel, LBC need to give him at least a warning about his conduct, because it is downright irresponsible. That said, though, Dan, I know Nigel well, but I think on this, he's playing the victim a little bit, because actually, one of the things about leadership, in my view, is that you've got to have vision, you've got to have personality, you've got to have character, you've got to have drive. He's got all these things, energy, charisma, but you've also got to have intuition, judgment, if you like, and moral fibre. Now, I would never talk about Andrew Tate in any sort of positive light whatsoever. Also, when I saw Nigel's video about what was going on and the fact that we weren't being told there was no transparency about the Southport report riots, he was right, but again, politicians tend to play on people's emotion, and the strongest emotion is anger and frustration with the authorities, whatever government, and Nigel does that very well. And I think that wasn't very well judged in this case, but that doesn't in any way absolve James O'Brien. James O'Brien is a nasty. I think he's got psychological problems, to be quite honest with you. I think he's a very nasty, very unpleasant, very unstable individual who absolutely LBC should exercise a bit of responsibility and rein him in.
Chloe, loads to pick up on there. So let's kick off first with O'Brien specifically. Do you agree with Nigel saying that he should be booted from the air? I mean, I always find this really ironic, Chloe, because obviously I'm a free speech absolutist, so I actually believe daylight is the best disinfectant. My solution is never to sack people, to cancel people, because that's what they did to me. And actually, in this day and age, you can't cancel anyone, can you? Because you just go into the independent space. So I don't necessarily think that is the solution, but there is clearly so much hypocrisy surrounding how O'Brien is able to incite violence compared to how anyone in the right is not really even allowed to criticize folk on the left.
I mean, just listening to that one statement at the start of his show, at the start of James's show, there was hypocrisy in that statement in itself, because he was first talking about the race riots and the racist thugs, and then straight after that talks about how Nigel uses inflammatory rhetoric. You're using inflammatory rhetoric by binning off anyone who went to a riot as someone who is racist, as opposed to someone who's just genuinely concerned about the insanely high migration numbers that this country can't cope with. So I'd say that to start with. I think that he is very nasty and very divisive. I totally agree with Henry on that. but I wouldn't agree with Nigel to say that he is directly inciting violence, because similarly, we saw when people were being arrested for Facebook posts, they were being arrested if someone said something with not very nice rhetoric, which may lead to violence. It might inspire violence. And I thought that that was wrong. I think if someone posts on Facebook saying, okay, we all need to meet at 7 o'clock at this place and we're all going to beat up a bunch of Muslims, okay, fine, that is clearly inciting violence. And maybe that's the only case when steps should be taken. Now, when it comes to what LBC should do, I know there's loads to pick up on here, so plenty to talk about. I think that LBC, as you say, daylight is the best disinfectant, Dan. And I think that I saw an article by Guido earlier in the year saying that James O'Brien's ratings were falling and falling. I think people are fed up of his rhetoric. And so hopefully, maybe they won't
let the market decide.
Exactly. Let the market decide. The ad revenue will fall. People won't want to sponsor his shows anymore. And then hopefully he'll get kicked off that way. I hope that that's the way, and that daylight can be the best disinfectant, as you say.
And what do you make of Henry's criticism of Nigel after the Southport massacre? Because personally, I don't agree with Henry on that, Chloe. I think there was a cover-up going on. I spoke to Richard Tice on the show on Friday. He believes there's still a cover-up going on. And the thing is, if you cover up information, it is sometimes that information vacuum that leads to unrest. Why were we not told more before the alleged perpetrator was charged?
I mean, whether there was an intentional cover-up or not, I don't know for sure, but certainly having an information gap, as Nigel has pointed out, in an era of social media where things move fast, that is going to cause speculation. And I think that what James O'Brien and many others have done, where they've essentially made it out as if Nigel is the sole cause of the riots, is completely wrong. It's just completely erroneous. The reality is that these riots were coming for years and years and years. We've had grievances bubbling up over years and years, people not being listened to. And whether it was the Southport event or whether it was some other event, sure, we saw some stabbings happen in the weeks following after that. Those could have been the sparking event if it wasn't Southport, right? It was going to happen at some point. Let's be honest. And I think that a lot of politicians that don't like Nigel Farage and media outlets and whatnot that don't like Nigel Farage, they wanted to point the finger at him to keep people's eyes off the real problem, which is rising immigration for years and years and years, and nobody being listened to. People
failure of multiculturalism, an invasion of our southern border. Oh, and by the way, if we have that discussion, we're far right. And actually, Starmer still hasn't allowed us, how ridiculous I even have to say that, to have that discussion. But just one other point I wanted to see where you stood on, Chloe, compared to Henry, is in regards to Andrew Tate. Because again, I have a bit of a different opinion on this. I think if people just don't talk about Andrew Tate and act as if Andrew Tate doesn't exist and that he isn't a big influence at the moment, then aren't we just, again, denying reality? And wasn't Nigel's point actually to say, look, Andrew Tate is a big influencer. Lots of young men are being influenced by him. So why is that? What is it at the moment about society that makes it, let's be quite frank here, a deeply unpleasant place for a lot of straight white men in the UK?
Well, I mean, there are several things I'd say on this. So first of all, I think that Nigel is absolutely right to point out the fact that it's interesting that Andrew Tate has acquired such a huge following from young men. Even if you don't like Andrew Tate, there must be a reason for that, and we must look into that. Just as much as Nigel made the observation that maybe the West did some things that provoked Putin, and that may have contributed to the start of the Ukraine war. Just observing facts like that has led to so much horrible spin against Nigel, saying he's a Putin apologist and that he's, a huge Andrew Tate enthusiast. And, secondly, on Andrew Tate, I don't think he's perfect, but I actually agree with a heck of a lot of what he says. I don't agree with his conversion to Islam, and I think that he very much uses sort of locker boy talk, and he'll sometimes say things that I don't completely agree with. But I think that, Yeah, I had to be interviewed for a documentary on Andrew Tate's case, and so I had to really look in depth into his case. I've been through all the information that is available, all the case documents, all about the one girl, Emma Gabby, who is the sort of only supposed victim, and her Moldovan friend Untila, and it is the most fabricated, obviously fabricated case. You have all the WhatsApps very, very
and Candace
clearly
Owens,
there.
who's done exactly the same thing as you,
and
has come to the same conclusion.
People, if you just look at the case, it is clear as day, right? And I believe in innocent until proven guilty. I'm sure that there is some possible world where someone presents to me information where I go, actually, okay, now there's clearly evidence that he's done something wrong, but I am yet to see that, and I am not going to call him a rapist and a human trafficker until I see any of that. And every time you see these people coming up with microphones questioning Nigel, or whether it's Andrew directly or anyone else, talking about the rape and human trafficking charges, none of those people have read any of the information about the case. I mean, you'll have Andrew and Tristan will talk back to these people, come up with the microphones and ask them, okay, who are the victims? And they're like, I have no idea, because they haven't even looked.
A financial motivation. We can never forget that. I mean, Henry
absolutely.
Bolton, do you want to come back at some of that? Because I think Chloe makes a very fair point, doesn't she? Innocent until proven guilty. Tate's been found guilty of absolutely nothing at this point. First, everyday subtle changes occur in our bodies, often going unnoticed. It's called inflammagene, a chronic low-grade inflammation that deteriorates our health as we get older. It's more than just a sign of aging, it's a key contributor to health issues like cardiovascular diseases, dementia and depression, and physical decline. It continuously weakens the body's resilience, turning minor infections severe and impacting mental health and cognitive function. Inflammagene significantly diminishes both quality of life and independence. Proper diet, exercise, and sleep can only get you so far. So that is why I take Clean Bean by Verso. It contains ingredients targeted to fight off and help prevent inflammagene. Research shows that these ingredients clean out damaged cells in the body that affect healthy cells, reduce inflammation, protect against oxidative stress, and improve conditions like cardiovascular diseases and neurological disorders. After taking Clean Bean for some time, I've noticed less joint pain, increased energy, better mood, and clearer skin. I can think better, I don't get as sick as before, and these are all benefits actually of reducing inflammation. Plus, Verso ensures transparency and quality by publishing third-party testing results for each batch they produce, so you know you're getting exactly what you paid for. Now, you can click the description in our YouTube or Rumble show notes, or head on over to www.ver.so and use the coupon code Outspoken at checkout to save 15% on your first order. So to repeat, that's buy.ver.so/outspoken. Use the coupon code Outspoken.
Yes, I agree. But look, we started talking about Andrew Tate in the context of Nigel's comments around Southport.
Yes.
And I don't think it was wise for Nigel to make that link. The other thing is, absolutely, there was an information void. And absolutely, when there is an information void, when something highly emotive and dramatic and traumatic has happened, as it did in Southport, then that void is going to be filled by speculation. There is no if, there's no but about that. It will inevitably happen. And I think, Nigel, it would be absolutely right to call out the police and the Home Office, the Home Secretary, for allowing that void to occur. The irresponsibility of that on the part of the authorities is staggering. Now, where I think Nigel had the wrong approach, and I'm not saying this with hindsight, the moment I saw him that video, this is exactly what I thought. I thought it was unwise, because I thought Nigel has not yet got into the role of being a member of Parliament. What he should have done is I think, what I would have done is I would have written to the Home Secretary, I would have written to the Chief Constable, and I would have said, I'd have made a video, I am concerned that there's an information void here. I am concerned that void will be filled by speculation, and that is dangerous. And I have written to the Home Secretary and to the Chief Constable, asking them to address that as a matter of absolute urgency. That would have been, I think, the wise way forward. And I don't see why, one would want to link it to Andrew Tate. And I agree exactly precisely with what's just been said. I don't like Andrew Tate. I don't like James O'Brien. But both have got a right to express themselves as much as I have. I think
no, indeed. I guess it's just ironic, isn't it, Henry? Because James O'Brien is always the first leading the charge for people to be cancelled. It was James O'Brien, actually, who pretty much got Nigel Farage sacked from LBC back in 2020. Yeah. So he is a hypocrite of the highest order.
Absolutely, and I agree with Clay on that. That absolutely, the man. I genuinely think that he has issues and that they need to be addressed, because if he is so startlingly hypocritical, he is so startlingly aggressive and unpleasant, and it's just not
wrong because he believed Carl Beach. He believed Carl Beach. I'm sorry, anyone who was taken in by Carl Beach, pretty much the biggest fantasist in British legal history, who tried to ruin the good name of many, many very honourable people, some of whom died during the process. I'm sorry, you cannot take them seriously as a journalist ever again, because Carl Beach is a paedophile and is a fantasist. And it was James O'Brien who platformed him for political reasons. That's the issue. But I was actually so let down by the mainstream media all weekend long. I've had so much to pick from. But I have to show you this interview, or at least some of the interview. The whole thing would make you mad. With a guy called Matt Barbette, who has taken up a job on Sly News. Now, I used to know Matt Barbette. He seemed like a very decent individual to me. But as soon as you now take the Sly News Concast coin, you have to start to hate England. Seriously, that's what it's about. And in this interview with the Conservative leadership favourite Robert Jenrick, Matt Barbette showed the sort of discrimination against the English and English identity that you would never see a mainstream presenter take against virtually any other country in the world. I was truly disgusted. Watch this.
What do you mean by English identity?
Well, look, I'm a proud Brit and a proud unionist. I want a strong Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, but I'm also proud to be English. And I think it is incredibly important that just as Scottish and Welsh leaders speak up for their distinct national identities, so do English politicians.
I'm going to interrupt you there, sorry. What is English identity?
Well, just as every nation has its own distinct history and culture, so does ours in England.
What is it?
Just as we would know what, a Frenchman would know what France stands for.
What is English identity then, Robert Jenrick?
It's the history and the culture of our country. And just as Scottish and Welsh politicians would speak with great pride about their own histories and identities, so I think it's right that English politicians do the same.
If you can't describe what English identity is, how is anybody coming here meant to understand that?
Well, I don't think, with great respect, that you distill the identity and the history of England into a soundbite like you're asking of me. There are things that I love about this country.
You've tried to distill it in an op-ed for the Daily Mail, haven't you?
Well,
that's what you've tried to do. When I think we've
No, I think I made a very different point to that, with all due respect. You, I suspect, are trying to dismiss a British or an English politician speaking about our national identity. I think it's incredibly important that we do talk about it. And I don't think that you distill it into
English identity.
I don't think
What do you mean by English?
Just imagine a mainstream presenter asking that of a Welsh politician, a Scottish politician, a Northern Irish politician, let alone a politician from Jamaica or South Africa. But Robert Jenrick held his own on this, and this is how he responded to that interview by Sly News on GB News yesterday.
No, Camilla, I didn't find it hard to describe Englishness at all. In fact, I was surprised that one of your rival channels even asked me the question. No one would ask a Welshman or a Scotsman or a Frenchman to define what is Welsh or Scottish or French identity.
Chloe, they actually hate the English, don't they? The establishment and the mainstream media. I mean, I'm remembering Emily Thornberry slamming someone who was daring to hang the St. George's flag outside their house. And I just found that interview completely bizarre. I mean, it's so easy to define what it means to be English. I mean, the royal family, Stonehenge, bangers and mash, the Sunday roast. I mean, there's the football. I mean, there's a million things that we should be so proud of, let alone our incredible history.
Absolutely. I mean, it feels as though we've certainly gone backwards in the fight against racism. We sort of got rid of racism and then created a new racism against white people. You know, as long as just racist against white people, it's okay, apparently. So St. George's flag definitely can't hang that. But, you know, imagine if you tried to tell someone off for holding up a Palestinian flag or any other country's flag. And you go to any other country, right? You go to Italy, you go to France, you go to Spain, and people have their flags up outside their windows. They have them everywhere. They're not ashamed. They're proud of their countries, and there's nothing wrong with it. But for some reason in England, it's now become this sort of horrible racist thing to have your own country's flag up. And then about him not being able to sum up in one quick soundbite what Britishness is. I mean, as you say, Dan, it's a million things. It's all the little things. Like, for example, the Brits are great at queuing, for example.
Yes.
And if you're standing in a queue and you've waited patiently, and then you see someone who's not English and clearly hasn't spent much time in the country come barges past and goes right to the front of the queue, that's where you're frustrated that someone hasn't integrated into your country.
Yeah.
There's so many little things. There was actually, you're probably aware of Peter Blexley. He's a former detective. He comes on GB News and talk a lot. And I was talking to him in the Talk Green Room, and he was saying to me, for example, one of the reasons why Caribbean cultures were able to integrate into Britain far better than people from Muslim countries is just because the Caribbeans are able to enjoy a drink. So they're all able to come down the pub and join in with the Brits. Whereas because those from the Muslim countries don't drink, and they don't go down to the pub like us Brits. That's one reason why they haven't been able to integrate. And I was like, I've never thought of that before, but it is so true. I mean, the pub is such a central part of our culture. Yeah. It's so many little things. And I know that they want their 10-second soundbite, but you just can't sum it up in that.
Well, of course not. But I mean, come on. Think of English culture from Shakespeare to the Beatles to the Spice Girls. I mean, gosh, there's a million things that anyone could say.
But I tell you what, Dan, I went to Shakespeare's Globe recently, and I was very disappointed because it's been very wokeified. So the entire cast was female. They didn't have a single man, even though most of the roles were meant to be men. And then they had Richard III was played by a woman, and they basically
they put trigger warnings up too, don't they?
To show that she was playing a man, they made her wear this like big sparkly jock strap for the whole show. I mean, it was absolutely ridiculous.
No, the Globe is completely captured by the woke mind virus. It's such a shame because who would have thought it? But Henry Bolton, it is astonishing, isn't it, that this anti-English feeling pervades the mainstream media, and shame on Matt Barbette, an Englishman, doing down his own culture like that.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, and look, you know, it's Nottingham University, I think, isn't it? You might correct me if I'm wrong. That wants to get rid of the term Anglo-Saxon. I mean, there's the Anglosphere, there's the Americans, there's Canadians, the New Zealanders, the Australians. All that, okay, the Canadians speak French as well. But you know, all of this, you know, there is this drive to remove our own identity. Now, I think, you know, if you look at what they did in the USSR and the Soviet Union after the Russian Revolution, you know, what did they do? They tried to dilute and, if you like, fade away the various sort of national groups that were within the Soviet Union, within Russia. The Central Asians were sort of partly ethnic cleansed, and populations were moved in order to achieve that. It is a left-wing thing, because when you have pride in your nationality, then, and you know, if that nationality, particularly like ours, is based on a long, centuries, if not millennia old tradition of freedoms and common law and independence and so on, and equal justice, then actually you've got an opposition, a resistance to a socialist agenda, a Marxist agenda, if you like. And so that's, I think, why they come out in a rash if you mention Britishness or Englishness. And I think that's the drive here. And what they have taken over, I remember when I was at school, we had, there was sort of, even amongst us sort of 11 and 12-year-olds, we were talking about school teachers who'd come from the London School of Economics, and weren't they sort of, they were particularly sort of un-British, and because they just, didn't have any interest in British history or British identity. The history teachers were all old school people, they were good traditionalists, if you like, and more conservative. And that has just grown. So they're in the media now. Now we're spending a fortune on the diversity consultants and officers within the NHS, within the civil service. We're spending a fortune on consultancies to try and take forward the diversity agenda, and it's all supporting other cultures, other societies, and ours doesn't get the protection that they do. So it's totally unbalanced, and I'm desperately worried if we, the Brits, don't wake up to this. The English, the Scottish, because look at Scotland, it's suffering. Look at the Irish; they've got the same problem, and it's growing. And we've got to push back against the likes of James O'Brien and Matt. If we don't, then and you are doing so, Dan, so well done. But
yes, I definitely am. Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please do subscribe if you want lots more clips and interviews like that. Plus, if you want to watch our totally uncensored after show, then visit www.outspoken.live.